What if the most valuable companies in America are quietly being undercut by AI models that cost nothing to download? In January 2025, a Chinese startup nobody in Silicon Valley had heard of released a free app. Within days, it had knocked ChatGPT off the top of Apple's App Store. Within hours after that, Nvidia lost $593 billion in market value, the single largest one-day loss for any company in Wall Street history. That was just the opening move. Since then, Chinese labs have kept releasing frontier-level AI models for free, over and over, each one chipping away at the idea that America's AI giants are untouchable. And the companies quietly switching to these free Chinese models aren't obscure startups in someone's garage. They're Airbnb, they're Pinterest, they're Uber. Some of Silicon Valley's most recognizable names are running on technology built in Hangzhou and Beijing, and most of their own customers have no idea. This isn't a fringe story circulating in developer forums anymore. It's a debate now splitting the White House, dividing OpenAI from Anthropic, and forcing America's most valuable technology companies to answer a question they never expected to face. What happens when your biggest competitor doesn't need you to pay them a single dollar to win? Here are 8 ways China's free AI models are threatening Silicon Valley, counting down to the one American tech executives are watching closest of all. Number 8, the shock nobody in Washington saw coming. On January 20th, 2025, a Chinese lab called DeepSeek launched a free AI assistant claiming to run on a fraction of the resources American companies use. By that Monday, it had overtaken ChatGPT as the most downloaded free app in the United States. The market reaction was immediate and brutal. The Nasdaq fell 3.1% in a single session. Nvidia's stock dropped nearly 17%, wiping out $593 billion in value, a record one-day loss for any publicly traded company. Broadcom fell over 17%. Oracle, a partner in the newly announced $500 billion Stargate AI infrastructure plan, dropped almost 14%. According to DeepSeek's own research paper, its V3 model had been trained for under $6 million, using downgraded Nvidia H800 chips, the kind sold specifically to comply with export restrictions. Its R1 reasoning model was reportedly 20 to 50 times cheaper to run than OpenAI's comparable system. Within 30 days, the app passed 100 million downloads, and more than 200 Chinese companies, from smartphone makers to telecom carriers, announced they were integrating it. Investor Mark Andreessen publicly called the release one of the most impressive breakthroughs he had ever seen. Data firm SimilarWeb later confirmed the scale of it, tracking DeepSeek's worldwide daily visits doubling from 6.2 million to 12.4 million in just 2 days around the R1 launch. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman went as far as accusing DeepSeek's developers of using OpenAI's own model outputs to train their system, a claim DeepSeek never confirmed or denied. That was the moment Silicon Valley learned China wasn't years behind. It just hadn't been trying to win the same way. But that shock from early 2025 turned out to be a preview, not a peak. What's happening in 2026 is bigger, faster, and it's not slowing down. Because the thing that really scares American AI executives isn't a single viral app. It's the price tag underneath everything China builds. Number 7, the price collapse nobody budgeted for. Chinese AI labs aren't just competing on quality anymore. They're competing on a cost structure. Western labs can't match without burning cash. Industry pricing data collected through OpenRouter shows Chinese models now running 60 to 90% cheaper than leading American frontier systems, while performing comparably on many everyday tasks. Look at the numbers directly. Moonshot AI's Kimi K3, released in July 2026, charges $3 per million input tokens and $15 for output, dropping to just 30 cents per million tokens on a cash hit. Compare that to Anthropic's Opus 4.8, priced at $5 in and $25 out, or its flagship Fable model, which runs even higher. On cache-heavy coding workloads, that gap can mean Chinese models costing over 15 times less for the same job. DeepSeek made a similar move public in 2026, cutting its flagship pricing by 75% and making the cut permanent. A direct shot at the capital-heavy business models Silicon Valley's frontier labs depend on to justify their valuations. When the cost of running a task drops by that much, it stops being a rounding error, it becomes the entire decision. And once the price gap gets that wide, it doesn't stay theoretical. It starts showing up inside the very companies that built Silicon Valley's reputation. Number 6, America's own tech giants are quietly switching sides. This is the part most users never see because it happens deep inside engineering teams, not in a press release. According to reporting from VentureBeat, Airbnb co-founder Brian Chesky said the company uses OpenAI's models but doesn't lean on them heavily in production, favoring faster, cheaper alternatives, specifically naming Alibaba's Qwen. Pinterest's chief technology officer Matt Madrigal confirmed the company went further, post-training Qwen on its own proprietary recommendation data to power its AI assistant, and achieving what he described as frontier-level quality at a 90% reduction in cost. Uber reportedly burned through its entire 2026 budget for AI coding tools in just the first 4 months of the year, with its own leadership admitting the expense was getting harder to justify without better results to show for it. Even Cursor, the AI coding startup valued at $60 billion, built its newest coding tool, Composer 2, on top of Moonshot's Kimi model rather than a purely American one. Research firm Andreessen Horowitz estimates that, of the startups already using open-source AI, roughly 80% have chosen a Chinese model over an American or European one. It isn't only startups saying this quietly either. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong and AI startup Lindy's founder Flo Crivello have both spoken publicly about using Chinese models specifically to cut costs, at a moment when doing so is politically uncomfortable enough that most executives wouldn't dare. These aren't companies boycotting the United States. They're companies doing basic math, and the math keeps pointing east. If the math is already winning inside boardrooms, the next question is obvious. Are these Chinese models actually catching up on quality? Or are people just settling for cheaper and worse? The answer is the part that should really worry Silicon Valley. Number 5. The open models are beating America's best on its own scoreboard. For years, the assumption in Silicon Valley was simple. Closed, proprietary models would always lead, and open alternatives would always trail a generation behind. That assumption broke in July 2026. Moonshot AI's Kimi K3, a 2.8 trillion parameter model released as free, downloadable weights, scored 57 on the widely cited Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index, placing it ahead of Anthropic's Claude Opus 4.8 and just behind the newest Claude and OpenAI flagship systems. On the independent front-end code arena benchmark, K3 ranked first overall, ahead of every closed American model tested. On Moonshot's own launch benchmarks, the model beat Opus 4.8 on every metric the company chose to publish. Alibaba's Qwen family, meanwhile, passed 1 billion cumulative downloads on the developer platform Hugging Face by January 2026, the fastest any model family has ever reached that milestone, and now accounts for more than half of all open-source model downloads worldwide. Data tracked by OpenRouter shows Chinese providers' share of total AI token traffic crossed 45% by April 2026, up from under 2% a year earlier. That is not a niche of hobbyists running experiments. That is a structural shift in where the world's AI workloads actually run. It isn't a flawless picture. Independent testers found K3's hallucination rate actually climbed alongside its accuracy gains, and Moonshot's own documentation admits the model can act with what it calls excessive proactiveness, making unrequested decisions on a user's behalf during long tasks. But even with those rough edges, an open, freely downloadable model is now sitting inside the same conversation as America's most expensive proprietary systems, something that was considered close to impossible just 2 years ago. So the models are cheap, and now they're competitive on quality too. But here's what almost nobody outside the industry understands. None of this is happening by accident. There's a much bigger strategy underneath it, and it has almost nothing to do with chatbots. Number 4, this is a hardware play disguised as a software giveaway. Washington's export controls were built to stop China from accessing Nvidia's most advanced chips, and by most accounts, they succeeded at that narrow goal. But according to a March 2026 staff report from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, titled Two Loops, China's open-source AI strategy isn't a workaround for that restriction. It's a coherent doctrine built specifically around it. The idea is straightforward. Chinese labs can't easily get Nvidia's top chips, so they optimize their models to run efficiently on domestic alternatives instead, particularly Huawei's Ascend processors. DeepSeek's V3.2 model launched with day-one support for Huawei's CAN software stack. If free Chinese models become the global default for developers, and those models are tuned to run best on Chinese hardware, demand for chips quietly shifts away from Nvidia and toward Huawei, without a single new export law needing to change. Nvidia's own CEO, Jensen Huang, has argued publicly that the export controls may have backfired, pushing Chinese companies to build a self-sufficient hardware ecosystem faster than they otherwise would have. The Commission's report adds a second layer. As these free models get deployed across Chinese manufacturing, logistics, and robotics, they generate real-world industrial data that keeps improving the models further, a feedback loop that has nothing to do with chips at all, and that trade restrictions were never designed to touch. One writer covering the strategy put it bluntly: The models were never really the product, they're the bait. Free, world-class AI creates demand for the hardware underneath it, and China happens to manufacture most of that hardware itself, from Ascend chips to the humanoid robots and drones, increasingly running on Chinese-trained models. Over half of the world's publicly listed humanoid robotics companies are already Chinese. When state funding covers the compute bill, the return on investment isn't measured the way it would be inside a Silicon Valley boardroom, quarter over quarter, chasing profitability to satisfy investors. It's measured nationally over a much longer horizon, the same patient logic that built China's high-speed rail network over decades, while American rail projects stalled under short-term budget pressure. That's a strategy built for the long game, decades, not quarters. But China isn't just playing that long game at home. It's exporting the entire playbook to the rest of the planet, and Washington is only just starting to notice. Number 3, Beijing is turning free AI into foreign policy. On July 17, 2026, at the World AI Conference in Shanghai, Chinese President Xi Jinping urged countries around the world to seize what he called a rare historic opportunity around open-source AI and use the summit to launch a new 29-nation AI alliance. It sounds like an argument about fairness and access. It also happens to be an extremely effective distribution strategy. Export controls can block a shipment of advanced chips. They cannot stop a free model from being downloaded in Nairobi, Jakarta, or Sao Paulo. Chinese labs like DeepSeek and Alibaba's Qwen are already the dominant AI options across large parts of the developing world, in markets where American frontier models remain expensive or restricted. Analysts have drawn a direct comparison to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Instead of financing ports and railways, Beijing is financing access to intelligence itself, and every government that builds its systems on a Chinese model becomes a little more entangled in a Chinese-built technology stack. As one American think tank fellow put it in reporting from Fortune, the country that wants to remain present in the technology stacks of nations across the world has to be able to compete with China on openness and cost, not just raw capability. Right now, on both of those fronts, China is ahead. Qwen ships under the Apache 2.0 license, widely considered the cleanest and most business-friendly open license available, while Moonshot's Kimi line uses a modified MIT license, both designed to make adoption as frictionless as legally possible anywhere in the world. That should already sound like a 5-alarm problem for Washington, and it is, but not in the way you'd expect. Because when officials in the American government finally sat down to figure out what to do about it, they couldn't even agree on whether Chinese AI is the enemy or the escape hatch. Number 2, Washington is at war with itself over how to respond. In July 2026, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent publicly threatened sanctions against Chinese AI companies over allegations of intellectual property theft, specifically pointing to the rapid rise of Moonshot's Kimi model. Reports from Axios and other outlets described internal discussions inside the Trump administration about an outright ban on Chinese open-weight models, along with a possible executive order holding American companies liable for security breaches tied to Chinese systems. Officials cited fears of hidden backdoors and Beijing-aligned censorship baked into model responses, though no security backdoor has been publicly documented in any major Chinese model to date. But the pushback was immediate and came from inside Silicon Valley itself. A coalition of 179 AI startups sent a letter urging the administration not to restrict access to Chinese open-weight models. And that letter was later joined by OpenAI, Google, SpaceX, and Amazon, warning that a ban would hand a monopoly to a handful of expensive American labs and choke off the startups now, depending on cheap open models to survive. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg told the Financial Times the United States should not block Chinese AI in its attempt to win the broader race. On the other side, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei called for tighter restrictions, warning that China could use these models to pursue military advantages or to reinforce domestic repression. Taiwan had already moved first, banning DeepSeek and several other Chinese AI systems, including Dubao, Yiyan, and Tongyi, from all government agencies in late 2025 after its National Security Bureau found the models routinely echoed Communist Party messaging and historical narratives. Some federal agencies have already banned DeepSeek internally, and officials have floated a narrower federal procurement ban that would stop government agencies and their contractors from using Chinese models, even without a nationwide ban touching private companies. Even the people responsible for protecting America's AI lead can't agree on what protecting it actually means anymore. And underneath all of that political noise sits the one number that explains why every executive in Silicon Valley is losing sleep over this. It's not about national security, it's about survival. Number 1. This threatens the entire business model Silicon Valley's AI giants are built on. Companies like OpenAI and Anthropic haven't just raised enormous sums of money. They've built valuations north of hundreds of billions of dollars on the premise that their models are so far ahead of the competition that customers will keep paying premium prices indefinitely. That premise depended on one thing: a performance gap wide enough to justify the cost. According to analysis from Enki AI covering the 2026 AI market, that gap has effectively closed. The demonstrable advantage that models like GPT-4 held from 2021 through 2024, the one that justified charging a premium, no longer clearly exists against the best open-weight Chinese alternatives. VentureBeat has described this moment as Chinese labs shattering Silicon Valley's, quote, token moat. The idea that owning the smartest model meant owning the customer relationship forever. When a company like Uber says it can no longer justify its AI coding budget, or when Pinterest gets frontier-level output for a tenth of the cost by fine-tuning a free Chinese model instead, that isn't a rounding error in a quarterly earnings call. That is the foundation of a $500 billion valuation quietly cracking in real time. And because the models are free and downloadable rather than tied to a subscription, there is no obvious lever left to stop it. You cannot outmarket a price of zero. So what does this actually add up to? Go back to that question at the start. What if the most valuable companies in America are quietly being undercut by AI models that cost nothing to download? They already are. The App Store that DeepSeek climbed in January 2025. The pricing sheet that now makes Opus and GPT 5.6 look expensive by comparison. The engineering teams at Airbnb, Pinterest, and Uber quietly rerouting their workloads. The Huawei chips waiting behind every free download. The 29-nation alliance Xi Jinping built in Shanghai. The letter 179 startups sent to stop a ban that OpenAI itself ended up co-signing. And at the bottom of all of it, a business model that assumed the gap would never close. None of these 8 forces developed in isolation either. The same efficiency that let DeepSeek train a model for $6 million is what let Kimi K3 undercut Opus on price. The same open-weight strategy capturing developers in Jakarta is the one now sitting inside Pinterest's own infrastructure. The same export controls meant to slow China down are what pushed its labs to build models that run cheaper than anything Silicon Valley can currently match. This isn't a story about one clever startup anymore. It's a country treating AI distribution the way it once treated solar panels and electric vehicle batteries, as an industry worth dominating through scale and price, not just through raw capability. And the uncomfortable truth for Silicon Valley is that most of its own customers won't ever ask where the intelligence behind their app actually came from. They'll just notice which one is cheaper and click, Silicon Valley didn't lose the AI race by falling behind on intelligence. It's at risk of losing it by getting outcompeted on a spreadsheet, one download at a time, by a product that costs absolutely nothing to try. Drop a comment. Tell me which of these 8 threats surprised you the most: the Nvidia crash that started it all, or the fact that some of America's biggest tech companies are already running on Chinese AI without telling you. Because the AI race was never just about who builds the smartest model, it's about who convinces the entire world to use theirs first.